The planet didn't fight back, that was the part that stayed with people. Afterward, not the breath fleet hanging in orbit like a second moon, not the broadcast that came through every frequency at once, not even the silence that followed. What stayed was the fact that Kalen Prime, a world of 4 billion people with a standing military and 3 generations of hard-won independence, looked up at the ships above them and chose not to fire a single shot. The Planetary Council debated for 6 hours, and then they signed. The breath didn't land troops they didn't need to. A small administrative vessel descended to the capital, collected the surrender documents, and left. By the time the sun set on Kalen Prime's largest continent, the Breath Dominion flag was being printed in government offices across the planet, and the old one was coming down. No blood, no rubble, no bodies in the streets, just a world that had looked at the numbers and made a decision. News reached the Galactic Concord station at Marin 3 days later. It arrived alongside news of 2 other surrenders, Pell Minor and the twin moons of Othar, which had happened the same week, with the same bloodlessness, with the same 6-hour councils and the same quiet decisions. The Concord's long-range tracking teams updated their maps. 14 years of expansion, 38 worlds absorbed. The breath line moved another 11 light-years toward the galactic interior. Delegate Mural of the Cathani looked at the updated map for a long time. There, not slowing down, he said. Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. Grand Commander Sarathlul did not watch the surrenders from the bridge. He watched them from his study, a long, narrow room at the rear of his command ship, lit by a single pale strip of light that ran along the ceiling like a scar. The room held almost nothing: a desk, a chair, display panel, and on one wall a map of the galaxy that he had been adding to for 200 years. Each added system was marked in the deep red of the Dominion. The red had been spreading since before most living beings in the galaxy were born. He was not young, even by the long standards of his people. His face was the color of old stone and just as still. His eyes were pale gray, almost white, and they moved slowly, always, like something that had learned long ago that speed was for things that were afraid. He was not afraid. He read the Kalen Prime report. Read the Pell Minor report. Read the Otter report. Set them aside and order the way. He set aside every report without ceremony, without visible reaction. His aide, a young officer named Vithar, stood at the door and waited. The next target, Saravul said. Thessa IV Grand Commander, Concord member world. Population of approximately 900 million. Their defense fleet consists of IV. Read it. Vithar stopped. Send the standard broadcast on approach. Give them 72 hours. Saravul looked at the map. They'll sign in 6. He was not being arrogant. He was reading a pattern. He had been reading it for 200 years, and it had never been wrong. Every civilization, when it truly understood what was in front of it, made the rational choice. The rational choice was survival. Survival meant signing. It was almost predictable enough to be boring. Almost. There was a shape at the edge of the map that he did not look at directly, a region he had been moving away from for 30 years, moving the entire Dominion away from, expanding the borders in the opposite direction, putting more and more worlds and fleets between the Dominion's heart and whatever lived in that dark. He did not Think about it, he looked at Thessa IV's coordinates instead, and he planned the emergency session of the Galactic Concord was held in the main chamber at Vel Marin, and it was louder than any session in living memory, which among some of the species present meant it was louder than any session in the last 400 years. 31 delegates, 11 species, all of them talking at once. Delegate Mural was trying to get the floor and failing. Delegate Pre of the Solon was reading casualty projections aloud, even though there had been almost no casualties, which was somehow making everyone more afraid, not less. The three Cathani delegates were clustered together, having a side conversation that everyone could see and nobody could hear. The chamber's senior moderator had called for order 6 times and been ignored 6 times. The of the Solon was not talking. She sat near the back of the Solon delegation, old enough that the fur along her jaw had gone white, and she was watching the updated map rotate slowly in the center of the chamber. Every delegate's attention was on the people talking. Theeks was on the map, 38 worlds, 11 light years of new territory. In 14 years, the Breath Dominion's outer edge was now 11 light years from the nearest conquered world. At current expansion rate, that world, Thessa IV, 900 million people, good agricultural land, 3 universities, a medical research institute that had published the leading work on cellular regeneration for the last 60 years, would receive a breath broadcast in approximately 4 months. The moderator called for order a 7th time. They stood up. It took a moment for the room to notice. When it did, it went quiet. She was not the most senior delegate present. She was not the loudest, but she was 312 years old, and she had been attending these sessions for 240 of them, and when she stood up and didn't immediately speak, the room understood that something considered was coming. We have been discussing response options for 4 hours, she said. Her voice was low, a little rough with age. Military response, diplomatic response, conquered border fortification, evacuation protocols for at-risk worlds. She paused. Has anyone sent word to the humans? The chamber was quiet for a moment, then someone laughed. It was not a mean laugh. It was the laugh of something being said that was slightly absurd but not wrong. The laugh of a room that had just been handed an idea it didn't know how to hold. Mrs. turned to look at her. The humans are not conquered members. No, they have no formal defense treaty with any world currently at risk. No. Their territory is 43 light years from the current breath line. Yes, the said. And they have been at peace for 40 years, which means they have been spending those 40 years building ships and going places to see what is there. And they have a word. She paused, searching her memory for the translation. They call it asterisk. Stubbornness. I believe they consider it a virtue. Another silence. Delegate Pre of the Solon set down her casualty projections. You're suggesting we ask a non-member civilization with no treaty obligation to intercede against an empire that has absorbed 38 worlds without a single significant military engagement. I'm suggesting the said that every civilization in this room has been calculating odds, and the civilizations that calculated odds signed the surrender documents. I want to contact a civilization that might do something else. Nobody laughed this time. The message was composed by committee, which meant it was too long, too formal, and apologized for the interruption 3 times. It was transmitted toward human space on a priority diplomatic channel, with a response request flag and an automated translation packet. The Conqueror's communication team estimated a response time of 6 to 8 weeks, accounting for signal travel and the time it would take the human government to convene the appropriate decision-making body. The signal took 9 days to reach the edge of human territory. It was picked up by the relay station at Harrow Point, flagged by the automated system as priority diplomatic, and passed up the chain in 4 hours. Communications officer named Usef checked it over, confirmed the translation was working, and marked it urgent. By the next morning it was on the desk of Admiral Yara Osite. She read it once, set it down, read it again. Outside her office window, the shipyard at Port Callisto was already lit up for the early shift. The bright white arcs of cutting tools, the slow movement of hull sections being guided into place by magnetic cranes, the distant thrum of engines being run through their test cycles. She had been watching this view for 11 years. She knew every sound of it. She picked up the message a third time and read the part about Thessa IV. Then she opened her desk drawer, took out a paper file, actual paper. She had always found screens too easy to close, and laid the message flat beside a photograph she kept face down in the drawer. She didn't turn the photograph over. She didn't need to. She already knew what was in it. A colony station, silver and white, hanging in orbit above a red-brown world, the name printed along the station's upper ring in letters large enough to read from a shuttle. Meridian. Oh, he put the message back down, stood up, walked to the window. The cutting arcs at the shipyard were very bright in the dark morning. She watched them for a while, then she picked up her comm and called her chief of staff. Clear my morning, she said, and get me a line to command priority. She paused and someone pulled the readiness report on the asterisk. Carthage. The asterisk Carthage had been in service for 31 years, which in most human institutions would mean she was getting old. In the Earth Federation fleet, it meant she had been rebuilt twice, upgraded 4 times, and had accumulated the kind of reputation that younger ships hadn't had time to earn. Yet, she was a dreadnought-class vessel, which meant she was large and heavily armed and designed with the explicit philosophy that if you were going to a fight, you should be able to end it. Her crew called her the stubborn old woman. They meant it as the highest possible compliment. In the dry dock at Port Callisto, work crews were already moving over her hull in the pre-dawn dark, checking seals, running diagnostics, loading supply containers into the ventral bays. The dock supervisor had gotten a priority resupply order at 400 and had responded to it the way any priority order at 400 was supposed to be responded to, with speed and without questions. He did not yet know where the Carthage was going. Across the shipyard, in a briefing room that smelled of recycled air and old coffee, Admiral O was reading the Breath Dominion's military profile for the second time and underlining things that interested her. The things that interested her were not the fleet numbers, although those were significant. They were not the weapons profiles, although those were significant too. The thing that interested her most was a single line buried in the intelligence annex, written in the dry language of analyst reports, easily skimmed and easily missed. In no recorded engagement. Has any breath military action. Encountered sustained resistance. Following initial contact, all subject. Civilizations have elected negotiate. Surrender within 72 hours of fleet. Arrival. She underlined it. Then she wrote 3 words in the margin in her own handwriting in the decisive script of someone who had made a decision before. They sat down to read. The words were, "First time for everything," she kept. Her pen closed the file. Outside, the cutting arcs burned white in the dark. And the Carthage sat in her dock, old and rebuilt and very heavily armed, waiting to find out where she was going. The Carthage had a smell, every ship had. One recycled air metal, the particular chemical signature of whatever cleaning compound the maintenance crew favored. The Carthage smelled like all of that, and also like something older underneath it, something that had soaked into the walls over 31 years of use and couldn't be scrubbed out, engine grease and old decisions. That was how Chief Engineer Rajan Prash described it to anyone who asked, which was mostly new crew members in there first week who hadn't learned yet that you didn't ask Prash questions unless you had time for the full answer. He was under the port's secondary coolant manifold when Admiral Asa came aboard, which meant he missed the formal arrival entirely and had to be informed of it later by the ship's AI, which he had named Vera because calling it the ship's AI felt rude. "The Admiral has boarded," Vera said through the small speaker. His left ear, "I know," Preach said. He did not know he was covered in coolant residue and arguing with a seal that had been misfitted at the last maintenance cycle. "Tell her I'll be at the briefing." "She didn't ask for you." "Good, then I won't be late." He went back to the seal. It was 3 off center, which under normal operating conditions meant nothing. Under the kind of conditions he had a feeling were coming, 3 could become a problem. He had not been told where the asterisk Carthage was going. He had been told to have her ready in 48 hours. 48 hours meant somewhere with urgency attached to it. He pulled the seal, refitted it, checked it twice, checked it a third time. 3 not anymore. Weapons Officer Dar Inosi was in the torpedo bay. This was not unusual. She spent more time in the torpedo bay than most officers spent in their own quarters, which had generated some commentary from the crew over the years, and which she had met with the same steady, unconcerned expression she meant most commentary with. The torpedoes needed checking. The torpedoes were always being checked. This was not a complicated position, and she did not understand why people found it interesting to discuss. She was working through the inventory, 3rd shelf port wall, the mid-range guidance systems, and she was talking while she worked. Not to herself, to them. "You've been sitting for 6 weeks, she said to the one she designated T7 during the last refit. It was a standard Mark IV with a slightly upgraded warhead and guidance fins she had personally calibrated. "That's too long, you get stiff." She ran a calibration check on the guidance system. The readout came back clean. "Good, you're fine, don't be dramatic." She moved to T8. The loading team had learned over 18 months aboard the asterisk Carthage not to comment on this. The torpedoes performed better than fleet average. Inco's targeting accuracy was in the top 4% across the entire Federation Navy. Whatever she was doing in the torpedo bay, it was working, and the loading team had collectively decided that the why of it was not their department. She was on T-14 when the SciFY channel opened and Admiral Asai's voice came through flat. Unhurried, the voice of someone who had been making announcements since before. Half the crew was born, all senior staff. Briefing room 1 hour, and Kosi looked at T-14. Later, she said, and put the calibration tool down. Helmsman Jinho Cho was eating noodles at the navigation console. He did this rarely enough that the other crew members on the bridge had learned what it meant when Cho had noodles at the console. Something was coming. He didn't do it before drills. He didn't do it before routine transits or standard patrols or the long quiet stretches between postings. He did it before the things that turned out to matter. Nobody had told him what the posting was. He had simply woken up that morning, gone to the galley, found the noodles he kept in his personal locker, and carried them to the bridge. He was eating them, slowly, methodically, reading through the navigation charts for the conquered border region when Lieutenant Sina, his second chair, sat down beside him and looked at the noodles and then looked at him. Is it bad? She asked. Joe took another bite, looked at the charts. Don't know yet, but it's something. It's always something, he said, which was not an answer, and which he knew was not an answer, and which Sina accepted, because she had served with him for 2 years and understood by now that this was as much as she was going to get. She pulled up her own console. The bridge was quiet except for the hum of the ship and the sound of Cho's chopsticks against the bowl. The briefing room was full and smelled of coffee and the particular tension that assembles itself in a room of people who have been told something is coming but not what. As stood at the front. She did not have notes. She had a display behind her showing a map of the conquered border region and the breath expansion line, which she did not gesture at or explain, because she assumed anyone senior enough to be in this room could read a map. She looked at them for a moment, then she told them. She kept it simple because simple was accurate. The Verith Dominion had been expanding for 14 years, 38 worlds, no significant military resistance. They were 4 months from Thessa IV, a conquered member world, and the conquered had asked the Earth Federation for help. We are going, she said. Nobody in the room looked surprised. Several people looked like they had been waiting for this sentence. We are going as an initial presence, while command assembles a larger response. Our orders are to reach the conquered border region, establish contact with Breath Command, and she paused, one beat dry and deliberate. Negotiate. She said the word negotiate the way someone sets a glass down carefully on an unstable surface. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, her tactical officer, glanced up from his notes. He was a careful man with a careful face, and his careful face was currently doing something that was not quite a smile. Negotiate, he repeated. That's what the orders say. How many breath ships are currently in the forward sector? Best estimate from conquered intelligence is between 40 and 60 in the forward deployment zone. Main fleet is further back. Vasquez wrote something down, looked at it, and we are sending the asterisk Carthage. We are sending the asterisk Carthage. A small silence settled over the room. Not the silence of people who were afraid, the silence of people doing arithmetic and arriving at a number they found interesting rather than troubling. These were the people who had stayed in the Federation Navy past their first posting, past their second, past all the Reasonable moments to do something. Quieter, they had a particular relationship with bad odds, Preesh. Sitting in the back with a faint residue of coolant still on his left forearm. Raised his hand, she'll need the port. Manifold seal checked before we transit. Done, he added before OSA could respond. Oi looked at him. Is there anything else on the ship that I should know about? Nothing that'll matter, Preesh said, which from him was a strong endorsement. Asa nodded. We depart in 36 hours. Department heads, I want readiness. Reports by end of day, dismissed. They filed out, Cho last to leave. Paused at the door, Admiral Asa was already looking at the map, Joe the conquered border which approached. Vector, she told him. He nodded once. Unhurried and left, she heard him in the corridor outside already talking to Sina about the gravitational variance in the transit corridor near the conquered outer marker, the technical details of getting a dreadnought to a place where it would be outnumbered, spoken in the same level voice he used for everything. She turned back to the map. The breath expansion line was red, and it was very wide, and it was still moving. Thessa IV sat on the interior side of the conquered border marked in pale blue. 900 million people going about there. Lives in the reasonable belief that the universe would continue to function in a way they could plan around, she thought. About Meridian Station, she had not planned to think about it, she thought. About it anyway, the way you think about a scar, not deliberately, just sometimes. Your hand finds it, she put it away. 36 hours, the Carthage left Port Callisto on a clear morning, which meant nothing, because space did not have weather, and the clarity of the morning on the planet below was irrelevant to a ship in orbit. But the crew noticed it anyway, those who could see the planet from their stations, and some of them felt the particular thing you feel when you leave a place while it looks its best. The transit to the conquered border took 11 days. They were not quiet days. Ran the crew through 3 full combat drills, 2 damage control exercises, and 1 all-hand situation assessment that lasted 4 hours and involved every department finding out exactly what they could do with partial power and a simulated hull breach in Section 7. Prosh responded to the simulated hull breach with the weary competence of a man who had dealt with enough real ones to find the simulation slightly insulting in its tidiness, but he ran it correctly, and his team's response time improved by 40 seconds from the first drill to the third, and Kosi recalibrated every guidance system on every torpedo in the ship's inventory. Twice Joe plotted and replotted the approach vectors, accounting for the gravitational fields of the 3 large bodies along their route, the debris field from an old mining operation near the conquered border marker, and the particular way the asterisk Cartha handled long transits when her port manifold was running at full efficiency, rather than the slightly reduced capacity she had been operating at for the last 6 weeks. She handled better. He adjusted the plots accordingly. On the 9th day they received conquered confirmation that the breath advance fleet had taken up a position 11 light years inside what had been neutral space, the fleet numbered according to the conquered long-range sensors. Approximately 42 vessels. Asa read the report in her cabin, made a note, filed it. On the 11th day, the Carthage crossed into the conquered border region in Vieira, the ship's AI. Precious terminology now adopted by most of the crew, registered contact on long Range sensors. Breath ships 41 confirmed, 1 probable. Spread across a wide holding pattern. Near the gravity shadow of a cold blue star called on the Concord charts. Vasquez came to Osai Station on the bridge. They've seen us, he said. Breath sensors are good, they'll have our profile already. Good, Osai said. Vasquez waited. Open a channel, she said. The communications officer, young, sharp, 3 years out of the academy, currently maintaining an expression of absolute professionalism that was costing him visible effort, opened the channel. The bridge was quiet. Joe had no noodles in front of him because he had finished them 2 days ago, and they had not yet crossed back through supply point. He sat at his console with his hands resting loose on the edge of it, watching the navigation display. Looking calm, Osai stood, looked at the forward screen, which showed the blue star and the distant shapes of 41 breath warships and the very large amount of space between them and the asterisk Carthage. She thought briefly about the word asterisk. Negotiate. This is Admiral Yara O of the Earth. Federation ship asterisk Carthage. Her voice was flat and even and filled the bridge without effort. You are currently occupying space in the conquered border region near a conquered member world. I'm going to need you to turn around. She nodded to the communications officer, who closed the channel. The bridge waited. Saravel's response came 40 minutes later. The signal delay of distance. It was formal, long, and delivered in the carefully translated cadences of someone who had delivered this kind of message before. It identified him by his full title and the full scope of the Dominion's reach. It cited treaty precedents and territorial claims and the administrative realities of the 38 worlds now under Dominion governance. It was in its way masterpiece of composed authority. At the end of it, there was an offer, politely worded, silk over stone, for the asterisk Carthage to withdraw from the region with full Federation honors intact. Oi listened to the whole thing, then she looked at Vasquez. What do you think? Vasquez considered. I think he's used to people saying yes to that speech. So do I. She looked at the forward screen. Again, 41 ships, cold blue star, a lot of space. Tell him we'll need more time to consider our response, she said. Communications officer sent it. Then Oi turned to Cho. Plot me an intercept approach to the forward breath element. I want 3 options, 1 conservative, 1 aggressive, 1. She paused. Creative. Cho's hands moved to his console. He did not ask what asterisk creative asterisk meant. He already knew. The breath formation was called the enclosure. It had a proper military designation in the Dominion's Tactical Codex. Formation 7, Variant C, designed for overwhelming a single hostile vessel. Open space. But the crews who used it had called it the enclosure for so long that the formal name had mostly stopped appearing in field reports. 41 ships, arranged in a sphere of fire, every angle covered, every escape vector locked, the subject vessel at the center, with nowhere to go and no good options left. Sarah had used it 11 times. 11 times the ship at the center had stopped moving and opened a channel. He gave the asterisk Carthage asterisk 3 hours to respond to his offer. When no response came, he gave the order and the breath fleet began its approach, slow, deliberate, the way you close a hand around something that has nowhere to run. There was no urgency in it. There was no need for urgency. The mathematics were clear, and the subject vessels commanders were surely reading the same mathematics and arriving at the same conclusion. Any moment now, the Carthage moved not away. Saravel watched the display and recalculated what he was seeing, because the first reading did not make sense. The Carthage was not pulling back, not turning to run, not opening a channel. She was accelerating directly toward the left flank of the breath formation at a speed that was aggressive for a ship that size, aimed at the gap between the fourth and fifth vessels of the outer ring. She's going to attempt a breach. Vithar said she won't make it. Saravel said the fourth and fifth vessels close the gap. The Carthage adjusted, not toward a new gap, toward the fourth vessel itself directly, as if she intended to ram it, which was insane. Which meant she did not intend to ram it, which meant the Carthage fired not at the fourth vessel, at the cold blue star, specifically at the magnetic field monitoring buoy that the Verith fleet had placed near Veller's outer corona 3 weeks ago, when they established their holding pattern, the buoy that was keeping the fleet informed of the star's magnetic activity so they could adjust their sensor arrays accordingly. The buoy that, when it was destroyed at close range by a Federation torpedo, sent an uncontrolled feedback pulse through every breath sensor array currently tuned to that frequency. 14 breath ships went briefly blind. Briefly was enough. The Carthage went through the gap. Day 1 she ran for the debris field. The debris field was what remained of a mining operation that had been abandoned 300 years ago near the conquered outer marker, a sprawling cloud of rock and old metal, and the occasional intact structure spread across a volume of space about 2 light minutes across. On the navigation charts, it was marked as a hazard to avoid. Cho had been studying it for 9 days. He knew which corridors were wide enough. He knew which clusters of rock were gravitationally stable and which were drifting on predictable vectors. He knew 3 routes through that a ship the size of the asterisk Carthage could use, and he knew that those same routes would be considerably more complicated for breath ships which had a longer beam and a wider turning radius at speed. The Carthage went in. 6 were ships followed. 2 of them made it through without incident. 2 of them clipped debris badly enough to reduce their speed. 1 of them misjudged a corridor and had to reverse, losing 12 minutes. And by the time it came out the other side, the asterisk Carthage was gone. The 6th ship did not come out at all. Not destroyed, tangled, engines fouled by a cable array from an old mining platform that Cho had flagged in his notes as asterisk do not enter this corridor, and that the breath navigator had not known to flag. In Cozy, watching the display from her station, made a small satisfied sound and said nothing else. Day 2 they pulled the breath ships toward a gas giant. It was a large one, the kind of planet that hadn't quite made it to being a star. Dull orange and slow turning, with a deep gravity well and a radiation belt around its equator that played havoc with targeting systems. OA had marked it on her first pass through the charts. Vasquez had asked her about it, and she had said asterisk maybe, and he had understood that maybe asterisk meant asterisk yes. Later was day 2. The Carthage came in low under the radiation belt, running the equatorial pass at a speed that made Cho's hands very steady and very precise on the controls, and made everyone else on the bridge focus extremely hard on their individual consoles. the gas giants. Gravity caught them and bent their trajectory, and for 43 seconds it was not entirely clear that Cho had the numbers right. He had the numbers right. The Carthage came out of the equatorial pass on the opposite side of the planet, swinging fast in the three breath ships that had been pursuing them, which had gone over the planet rather than under it because going under it had looked insane from a distance, came around the far side of the planet into the path of the Carthage. Forward guns at a range that Nkosi described afterward to T7 and T8 as almost considerate. She fired 2 VTH ships out of the fight, one pulling back with significant damage. The Carthage went around the gas giant again from the other side this time and disappeared into the star shadow before the rest of the breath fleet could reposition. Sarah looked at his display and did something he had not done in a long time. He ran the tactical model again. He had run it before the engagement. The model had said the Carthage would either attempt to flee or be destroyed within 4 hours of initial contact. The model was now on its third revision, and each revision was looking less like the previous one. The ship was still functioning. 7 of his vessels were damaged or out of position. The one in the debris field was still being extracted. He looked at the model. He looked at what the Carthage had actually done. He looked at the difference between these two things. What are they doing? Vithar asked, not tactically. The tactical picture was clear enough. He meant something underneath the tactical picture. What kind of thing was this? Saravel thought about it. They're not trying to win, he said slowly. Vithar waited. They're not trying to escape either. He looked at the display. The Carthage had moved again northeast by the conquered chart grid toward the system with the 3 moons. They're making us chase them. Every position we take, they move. Every move we make, they use. He paused. They are not playing a game they can win. They are playing a game where we keep losing pieces. Vithar looked at the display. We still have 34 functional ships against 1. Yes, Sarah said. He did not say, and yet he did not need to. Day 4, the system with the 3 moons. The moons were small and close orbiting, and they created a gravitational interference pattern between them that Cho had described to Sina as a 3-buddy problem. With an attitude, navigating through it required continuous adjustment, small corrections, constant attention, no room for anything automated. You had to fly it by hand. Cho flew it by hand. The breath ships came in on a wider approach, staying outside the worst of the interference zone, which was tactically sensible and which also meant they were predictable. They took up positions at the 3 points of the moon system where the interference was lowest, clean angles, good coverage. The problem was that the Carthage was already on the other side of the system by the time they settled into position, having come through the middle of the interference zone where no sane pilot would go, and she came out facing the rear arc of the nearest breath contingent. 2 more ships gone. A third trying to turn took a glancing hit to its engine section that left it drifting. The Carthage took damage too. This time a breath volley caught her port side in. Prosh spent 90 minutes in a section of corridor that was technically in vacuum, held there by a magnetic clamp, and his own stubbornness patching a hole breach with a tool kit and language that he would later describe to new crew members as focused communication with. The ship the breach held, the Carthage, kept moving day 6. 11 breath ships damaged or destroyed. The Carthage was running with partial shielding on the port side, 1 secondary weapon array offline, and a coolant system in the engine section that was running hot in a way Prash was managing by spending an uncomfortable amount of time in the engineering bay, personally supervising the pressure regulators. He had stopped sleeping in his quarters. He had a cot next to the regulators now. He talked to Vera while he worked. She's holding, Ver said. I know she's holding. I'm the one making her hold. He checked the regulator. What's the temperature on the secondary loop? Vera told him too high. I know. Drop the flow rate on the tertiary and reroute through the already done. That's why it's too high and not critical. Prash looked at the ceiling, which was a thing he did when he was processing information that complicated his annoyance. Oh, you're welcome, Vera said. He went back to work on the bridge. Asa was reading the message from Earth. She had sent her request for reinforcements on day 2 in between the gas giant maneuver and the 3 moon system. The request had been factual and specific. Current breath force numbers, current * Carthage status, estimated timeline for breath reinforcement of their own. She had not used the word help. She had not described the situation as critical. She had said going to need more ships. Send the ones with the dents. The response had taken 4 days to reach her. Accounting for the relay distance, she read it now. A fleet, 30 ships assembled from 3 different posting regions, already in transit. Names she recognized. Captains she had served with, in some cases served on her ships that looked as a group, like a collection of vehicles that had each individually been through a number of experiences there. Manufacturers had not planned for the ones with the dents. She set the message down. Vasquez was at her shoulder. He had read it with her. She had not told him to, but she had not told him not to. And his careful face was doing the thing. That was not quite a smile again. 30 ships, he said. 30 ships against 41. Which is now more like 30. 30 of theirs. And 30 of ours, Ossie said. That's almost even. Vasquez considered this. We've never had almost even. No, Osa said. We've had one. She looked at the forward screen. The Carthage was an open space between systems now, running a holding pattern. Buying time. Sarah's remaining ships were regrouping. Both sides were catching breath. From the weapons bay, a channel opened briefly. Nkosi checking in. Admiral, torpedo inventory. Go ahead, down to 64%. Guidance systems on the remaining inventory are all clean. A pause. They're ready. Almost said * good. She stopped herself because she understood that they're ready was not a status report. Not entirely, and that responding to it as only a status report would miss the point. Tell them good, she said. A beat of silence. Yes, Admiral. The channel closed. 23-year-old gunner's mate Tewami from Logos, who had been at his station for 6 days with 4 hours of sleep on a good night, was humming again. He hummed the same song every time. Nobody had asked him what it was. It had become over 6 days as much a part of the Bridgeg's ambient sound as the ship systems, something that meant the ship was still working, still moving, still in it. Cho at the navigation console did not have his noodles. He looked at the approach vectors the incoming Federation fleet would be using. He looked at the position of the breath ships. He looked At the space between them, his hands moved across the console, slow, deliberate, already planning the next piece of it. The Carthage moved through the dark, dented and hot and still, going toward the moment when 30 ships, with dents of their own, would come over the edge of the sensor rain, and even the odds for the first time in 6 days. The stars did not care. The dark did not care. The * Carthage cared enough. For all of it, the Federation fleet came in from the northwest. That was the conquered chart designation northwest, relative to Thessa IV's orbital plane. And it was the direction that the was watching when the long-range sensors at Marin Station picked up the first signatures. She had been at the observation post for 2 hours before the ships appeared. She had not told anyone she was there. She had simply come the way old people come to high places when something is about to happen that they want to see with their own eyes rather than read about afterward. 30 ships, they came in loose formation. Not the tight geometric precision of the breath fleet, not the ceremonial spacing of a diplomatic convoy. They came the way a group of people arrive who have each been somewhere difficult before and have stopped worrying about how they look getting there, spread out slightly, uneven, the kind of formation that looked disorganized until you noticed that every ship in it had a clear field of fire and no two were close enough to interfere with each other's movement. The watched them come in. The sensor readout beside her scrolled through the ship identifications. She did not know most of the names, but she looked at the whole profiles, at the patch sections, and the replaced armor plates and the places where 2 different generations of whole material met at a visible seam. And she understood what she was looking at. These ships had been in fights before this one. They had come out of those fights. They had been repaired and sent back, and now they were here moving at combat speed toward a breath fleet that still outnumbered them in a region of space that was not technically their territory, for a world that was not technically their responsibility. She stood there in the cold observation post and watched them come, and she did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the picture was not already saying more clearly. The Carthage came out of her holding pattern the moment the fleet arrived on sensors. Oy did not wait for a formal link-up. She sent one message to the incoming fleet: coordinates, breath positions, current tactical picture, and got back one message from Fleet Captain and Diddy Ibarra aboard the *F's Resolute. Which read, "Seen it coming in on your left, don't wait for us." I read it and felt something that she did not name and did not examine. She turned to Cho. "Take us in." Cho's hands were already moving. Saravel saw the Federation fleet arrive and did the thing a commander of 200 years experience did when a situation changed. He recalculated 30 new ships, his remaining fleet after 6 days of the Carthage particular approach to the engagement was at 29 functional vessels. The numbers were close to even now. Close to even was not a situation Saravel had been in for a very long time. He ran the tactical models. The models said the engagement was winnable. The breath ships were individually more powerful than most of the Federation vessels. His fleet had greater total firepower. The terrain favored neither side. The models said winnable. He looked at the models, and then he looked at what 6 days of the Carthage had taught him about the difference between what the models said and what actually happened. And he felt not fear, he did not think. It was fear he was not certain he had. The correct word for it, something he had not felt in a long time, attention. Real attention, the kind that came when a situation stopped being predictable. "They're splitting the engagement," V. Thar said. Sarah Vell looked at the display. The Federation ships were not forming a line, they were breaking apart smaller groups of 3 and 4 ships each. Group moving toward a different section of the breath formation. The Carthage was at the center of it, driving straight. For the Vreth command element, straight. For him, she's coming for us, V. Thar said. There was something in his voice that was not quite disbelief. Yes, Saravel said, she is. The Battle of Thessa IV was not a single battle. It was 6 separate engagements happening at the same time across a volume of space roughly 14 light minutes across, each one requiring the Vreth fleet to make decisions about where to send ships, which calls to answer, which positions to hold. Every time the Vreth command element chose to reinforce one engagement, another one somewhere else reached a critical moment. Every time they pulled ships back to consolidate, the Federation groups re-angled and made consolidation cost something. Vasquez ran the coordination from the Asterisk Carthage Asterisk bridge, tracking all 6 engagements on a display that had been expanded to cover most of the forward wall. He had not slept in 22 hours, his voice relaying position updates and targeting advisories to the other Federation captains had gone flat, in the way that voices went flat after long enough, not tired exactly, just stripped of everything unnecessary, pure function. Ibarra's group, 4 ships including the Asterisk Resolute Asterisk, caught the breath left flank moving to reinforce the center and hit them from above the orbital plane, an angle the breath left flank had left open because they were focused on the threat in front of them and had not expected anyone to come from above. The breath left flank stopped moving to reinforce the center. Federation group on the right, 3 ships, one of them held together in its forward section with what the crew later described as determination and sealant, pushed through a breath line that had thinned when ships were pulled to cover. The left flank, the line gave not collapsed, not rooted, but it moved, and once it moved, it had to keep moving to avoid being cut. And once it was cutting, it was no longer holding position, and once it was no longer holding position, the thing it had been holding position to do, take Thessa IV, was no longer something it could do. Today Adame was humming. He fired in the gaps between notes, which was not something he had been trained to do, and not something anyone had told him was correct form, and not something he could have explained if asked. His targeting numbers were good, his hands were steady. The song he hummed was one his grandmother had sung in her kitchen in Logos when he was small, something about water in the morning, and he had not consciously thought about that in years, and was not consciously thinking about it now. He fired, he hummed. The Carthage cut through the space between 2 breath ships moving to intercept her, and Cho took her through the gap at a speed that technically exceeded the recommended operational parameters for a dreadnought of her class in proximity. Engagement and Prosh in the engineering bay made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated clearly that he was aware of this fact. The Carthage came out of the gap facing the breath command ship. Inas was already talking. T9, T10, she said, her voice as steady as if she were Reading a grocery list. You've been waiting. This is it. She fired. Saraville's command ship was not destroyed. It was hit significantly. The forward section took damage that killed 17 crew members and knocked out the primary command relay and left the ship functional but no longer capable of coordinating the fleet with the efficiency it had been managing 20 minutes ago. The fleet could still fight, but the nervous system of it, the coordination, the real-time repositioning, the management of 6 simultaneous engagements had been degraded, and a fleet with degraded coordination in a multi-point engagement was a fleet that was going to start making slow decisions at exactly the moments when it needed fast ones. Sarah stood at his secondary command station. The primary was offline and watched his display and understood what had been done and how it had been done and why it had worked. The humans had not tried to destroy the fleet. They had tried to break its ability to think clearly. They had created enough simultaneous problems that any solution to one of them made the others worse. They had understood that a fleet this size with this much firepower could not be beaten in a straight fight with 30 ships, so they had not fought a straight fight. They had fought 6 separate fights, all connected, none of them individually decisive, all of them together amounting to something that was, he had not been beaten, but he had been stopped in 200 years of command across 11 uses of the enclosure and 38 absorbed worlds. Not a single subject civilization had stopped the advance. He looked at his display. The Breath fleet was still functional. The Federation fleet was still functional. The battle had reached the state that military theorists called a mutual deterrent standstill, which was a formal way of saying that both sides were in a position where continuing would be expensive, and neither side had the clear advantage that made expense worthwhile. The Breath had never reached this state before because the subject civilizations had always made the rational calculation and stepped back before it got here. He looked at his display for a long time. Then he did something he had never done. In 200 years of command, he sent a ceasefire proposal that was still at the observation post. When the engagement signatures on the long-range sensors stopped multiplying, she watched the display settle. Ships still present, weapons cold, the hot statistical noise of an active battle going quiet by degrees. She had been at enough of these sessions, over 300 years, to know what a ceasefire looked like on a sensor readout. The signatures didn't disappear, they just stopped moving toward each other. She released a breath she had not known she was holding. Below her in the Concord station's main communication hall, there was movement staff relaying the news, delegates being called back to session, the machinery of institutional response beginning to turn. She could hear it distantly, a low hum of activity working its way up through the station's floors. She did not go down yet. On the surface of Thessa IV, which she could not see from here, but which she was thinking about, 900 million people had spent the last 6 days watching the sensor readouts in their homes, in public halls, and government offices, watching the lights in their sky, making their own calculations about what those lights meant. Waiting, the lights had stopped moving toward them. She thought about the question she had asked in the Concord chamber, which someone had laughed at, which had stopped being funny fairly quickly. She thought about what it cost to ask a question that got laughed at and then turned out to be right. She thought about a human admiral she had not yet met on a damaged ship that was still functional in space, that was technically none of her business, who had spent 6 days making the VHT Dominion encounter a concept it had no framework for, the concept of a door that didn't open when you pushed it. She would meet the Admiral eventually. There were going to be negotiations. There was a great deal to discuss. She hoped she would remember to ask about the noodles. She had seen it on the bridge transmission feed, a young helmsman before the engagement eating noodles at a navigation console, and she had not understood what it meant, but she had the strong feeling it meant something. And she was 312 years old, and she had learned to pay attention to the things she didn't understand. She looked at the settled sensors for another moment, then she went downstairs. On the Carthage bridge, after the ceasefire confirmation came through, nobody cheered. That was the thing that Sina remembered afterward. When she told the story, you might expect cheering. There was no cheering. Adame stopped humming. Vasquez looked at his display for a long moment and then sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. Cho's hands came off the navigation console slowly, the way you release something you've been holding tightly for too long. Oi stood at the forward screen and looked at the space where the battle had been. Thessa IV was visible from this angle, a pale crescent against the dark blue-green at its edge, where the atmosphere caught the light of its sun. 900 million people, Medical Research Institute, 3 universities. A world that had been 4 months from a broadcast that would have started a 6-hour council and ended with a signature. It was still there. She looked at it for a while, then she turned to Vasquez. Damage report. Port shielding at 30%. Forward weapons bay 2 is offline. Hull integrity at 91 overall, with 3 sections flagged for priority repair. He paused. Crew casualties 14. Injured, none critical. She received this. Held it. Tell Prash, she said, that she held. Vasquez sent it from the engineering bay. After a moment, a single message came back. I know, us. Looked at Thessa IV one more time. Then she picked up the ceasefire terms the breath had transmitted and began to read. There was a great deal of space still left in the proposal for what came next. Both sides at a standstill, neither side beaten. 38 worlds still under dominion. Governance, a galaxy that had watched one ship and then 30 hold a line that nobody thought could be held, and somewhere at the edge of the breaths maps, something Saravel had never talked about to any civilization he had absorbed, something he had been running from for 30 years, still moving through the dark. She did not know about that. Yet she would. The station at Marin had a room nobody used for anything important. It was on the station's outer ring, 3 levels below the main diplomatic hall, and it had a long window that looked out at the dark between systems rather than at the star or the nearby worlds. Someone had put a table in at once and chairs, and then nobody had met there for anything official, and gradually it had become the kind of room that accumulated forgotten things. An old star chart on the wall, a broken instrument on a shelf, 3 chairs that didn't match. The kind of room that existed in every large station and was used, if at all, by people who needed somewhere to stand. That wasn't a corridor. Oi found it on her second day at Vel Marin while the formal negotiation framework was being constructed by people whose job was constructing frameworks and who did not need her in the room while they did it. She had walked the outer ring for 20 minutes and ended up here at the window, looking out at nothing in particular. She came back the next morning and the morning after that. By the fourth day it had become without any formal decision being made her room. The station staff had noticed and said nothing. A junior aide had quietly left a chair from somewhere else, a better one with a back that worked near the window. Osa had not thanked anyone for it because she had not asked for it and therefore could not officially acknowledge it without having a conversation she didn't want to have. She sat in it and looked at the dark and waited for the negotiations to arrive at the point where she was needed. Saravel came to Marin on the 8th day. He came without ceremony, one ship, a small command vessel, nothing that announced itself as a grand arrival. The Concord's reception committee had prepared for something larger and had to reorganize quickly when it became clear he was already docking by the time they were assembled. The who had not been part of the reception committee because she had understood somehow that the committee was going to need to reorganize was already at the docking bay when he came through. She was the oldest person in the room. He was, she suspected, older than anyone in the room by a margin that would have been difficult to explain to most species. They recognized something in each other, not warmth, not familiarity, but the specific thing that very old beings recognized in other very old beings. The understanding that they had both outlasted many things they had expected to outlast them, and some things they hadn't. He looked at her. She inclined her head. The human admiral, he said, not a question, not a request, a statement of what he expected to happen next. She's here, the said. The formal negotiation was held in the main diplomatic hall, and it was long and procedural and covered in the first 2 days the expected ground, ceasefire, terms, troop positioning, the status of the 38 absorbed worlds, the question of conquered border integrity, the framework for what a longer peace might require from both sides. Asai sat through most of it. She was not the lead negotiator. The Federation had sent diplomatic staff for that. People who knew the language of negotiation in a way that she did not and did not particularly want to. Her role was presence. The Vurath knew who had been in the asterisk Carthage. The Vurath knew what 6 days and then 1 battle had cost them. The presence of the person responsible for that sitting at the table said something that the diplomatic staff's careful language did not say and did not need to. She listened. She read the documents when they were placed in front of her. She asked 3 questions in 2 days, each of them specific and practical, and accepted the answers and moved on. Sarah Vell watched her from across the table. He had been watching her since the first session, not with hostility, with the attention he gave to things he did not yet fully understand. She was smaller than he had expected. Most beings, when he finally met them after reading their files and their battle records, were different from the picture in some way. She was quieter than he had expected, and she sat very still, which was unusual in humans based on his intelligence reports, and her eyes, when they found his, did not look away. He found this difficult to characterize. On the 3rd day, after the formal session ended, he asked to speak with her directly. The request went through 3 layers of protocol. Oy received It read it and sent back a single word, fine. They met in a small room off the main hall, just the two of them and a translator unit, because his command of the human language was functional, but not precise enough for a conversation that mattered. And her command of breath was non-existent. The room had 2 chairs and a table and a window. Through the window the pale crescent of Thessa IV was just visible. At the edge of the frame, he looked at it for a moment before he spoke. 42 ships, he said, against 1 and then 30. Yes, we should have 1. Yes, she said. Again, no argument in it, just agreement with the arithmetic. He studied her. You knew that before you came. I knew the numbers, and you came. Anyway, she said nothing. She was looking at the window at the crescent of the planet, and her face was the face of someone thinking about something that was not in the room. He waited because he had 200 years of practice at waiting. And after a moment, she turned back to him. Someone had to, she said. He considered this. It was a simple sentence, and it should have been a simple answer, but it wasn't. He could hear something under it, not bravado, not ideology, something that was quieter and older than both of those things. He did not have the correct translation for it, and he suspected the translation did not exist in his language. There is something I did not tell the conquered, he said. She waited. He told her. He told her about the outer dark, the region at the far edge of the maps that he had been not looking at for 30 years. He told her what had been found there 12 decades ago when the Dominion was younger and still exploring outward. He told her what it had done to the 3 worlds that were closest to it. He told her the name his people had given it, which translated imperfectly but approximately to the consuming dark, and he told her that the expansion, the 38 worlds, the steady march inward toward the galactic center, had not been conquest for its own sake. It had been running. The Dominion had been putting distance between itself and the thing in the dark. Every absorbed world was another layer of buffer. Every new border was further from the outer rim. The mathematics of it were not military mathematics, they were survival mathematics. He stopped. The room was quiet outside. Thessa IV turned in its orbit, slow and indifferent. Asa had not moved during the telling. She sat the way she had sat through the 2 days of formal sessions, very still, listening with her whole attention. When he stopped, she did not speak for a moment, and he waited to see what she would do with what he had told her. He expected several things. Horror was likely, demand for more details, calculation of what this meant for the ceasefire terms, the reopening of questions that had been closed. She said, how far out is it? He had not expected that specific question from here. Approximately 240 light years beyond the outer rim. Has it moved since the 3 worlds? Slowly. Our best projection is that it continues outward expansion. Does it respond to anything? Have you tried anything against it? He looked at her. We ran from it. I know. What did you try before you ran? He was quiet for a moment. Weapons, standard armament. It did not respond in the way matter responds to weapons. Our ships that went close enough to gather data did not return. He paused. We ran. Asa nodded. Slowly, she was looking at the window. Again, the expression on her face was one he could not read. He was good at reading beings after sufficient study, and he had been studying her for 3 days, and he could not read this expression. I'll need the coordinates, she said. He processed this, the coordinates of the consuming dark. He looked at her. Admiral, that is, I know what it is. I need the coordinates. You understand what I have told you. 3 worlds, weapons that did not work. Ships that did not return. Yes, and you want the coordinates. And your scientists' data, everything. They gathered before you started. Running all of it, he sat back, he was, as he had told Vithar, not easily surprised. He had just been surprised. Twice in 10 days by the same species, which was twice more than the previous 200 years combined. Why, he said, turned from the window and looked at him directly. Because it's there, she said, and because if it's moving, eventually there's nowhere left to run to, and because someone should go look at it and figure out what it actually is before it gets to a place where looking at it from a distance isn't an option anymore. A silence that, he said carefully, is an insane approach to the problem, probably. She reached into the folder on the table in front of her and took out a paper form, an actual paper form, the kind that still existed in Federation logistics because some administrative processes had never been fully digitized, and set it flat on the table. It was a resupply authorization for the asterisk. Carthage, it had already been filled out, it had already been signed. She had done it before she came into this room. He looked at the form, he looked at her. He looked at the form again. You filled this out before I told you, he said. I filled it out before I came to Vel Marin, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. You did not know what I was going to tell you. No, but some things. Been driving an empire inward for 30 years, and I wanted to know what it was. She looked at the form. I want your scientists, the ones who went close enough to gather data, whatever data they still have, and your charts of the outer rim. He looked at her for a long time. 200 years of command, 38 worlds. Absorbed an advance that had never been stopped. And now this, a human with a damaged ship and a signed resupply form, telling him she wanted coordinates to the thing he had spent 30 years running from, with an expression that was not brave and not reckless and not the face of someone who had not understood what they were being told, the face of someone who had understood and was going. Anyway, he thought about what his people had done when they found the consuming dark, what every civilization in the galaxy would do if they knew the calculation, the rational choice. He said, my scientists are on the command ship. I will have their data transferred tonight. She nodded, picked up the resupply form, put it back in the folder. Outside the room, the station continued its operations, the hum of it coming through the walls, the distant voices of delegates and staff, the ordinary machinery of civilizations, trying to find a way to share space with each other without destroying what they'd built. In the corridor outside the small room, Cho was sitting against the wall with a bowl of noodles he had sourced from somewhere on the station. He had not disclosed where, and nobody had asked, eating with methodical patience while he waited. A breath guard stood 6 m down the corridor. He had been standing there since Sarah Vell went in. He was large, unformed, and had the expression of someone performing duty correctly and finding it neither interesting nor unpleasant. Cho looked at the guard. The guard looked at Cho. Cho held out the bowl. The guard looked at it, looked at Cho, looked at the bowl again, reached over slowly, the way you reached for something you weren't certain about, and took one noodle. He ate it. He looked at The ceiling, the way people looked at. The ceiling when they were assessing. Something they hadn't expected. Then he looked back at Cho. Cho held the bowl out again. The guard took another one. They sat there in the corridor outside. The room where an admiral and a grand commander were agreeing to go look at. The thing that ended worlds, and they ate noodles in the particular silence of two beings who did not share a language but had found unexpectedly a small thing. They shared anyway. Asa came out of the room alone. Cho stood up. He didn't ask. He looked at her face and she looked at his, and he took the bowl back from the guard, who released it without comment and fell into step beside her. They walked the corridor toward the outer ring, toward the room with the good chair and the window that looked out at the dark between systems. She stopped at the window. She put her hand against the glass. 240 light years beyond the outer rim, something ancient and enormous, moving slow, consuming what it found, unbothered by the weapons of the civilizations that had tried, and the silence where those civilization ships used to be. It had never met anything that didn't run. The Carthage was being resupplied. Her crew was sleeping or checking systems or talking to torpedoes or fixing things that didn't need fixing. Yet so they wouldn't need fixing later. Adame was probably humming. Prosh was probably arguing with Vieira about something that Vieira was probably already right about, out past the rim in the dark where no charts had markings and no beacon sent signal. Something that had eaten 3 worlds and frightened an empire into 30 years of retreat moved through the silence at its own slow pace. It had never encountered anything that turned around. Carthage was already being resupplied.